Hello, welcome to another Real Monsters quarantine special. It's Thursday, and this is SK Barrett. Joining me is the ever lovely and talented Wes Hobrick,
The ever quarantined Wes Hobrick. Well,
right?
not quarantined, but self-imposed kind of quarantine, I guess. And hopefully this friggin' ends soon.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately. Oh man. Uh, uh, uh. But I think
Yeah,
it kind of makes it doubly important what we're going to be talking about tonight too, with the mob prohibition and white collar monsters, with all of that happening so close to the last major pandemic that happened.
very true. And it's a nice break from serial killers.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, s- Mobsters and gangsters, smugglers, rum runners, they have a much more idealized image in the public than most serial killers,
They
even
they
though they
definitely
were
do.
often equally violent.
Yes. Oh, they definitely do. And, I think it kind of gets back to really this country being, founded by essentially outlaws, not to, put them in the same category. But yeah, Americans have always sort of had affection for the lawbreaker um, in that vein.
Especially when their law breaking goes against institutions and not individuals.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Which,
Um, yeah, and you're right, it does go down. A lot of our early immigrants were people who were, much like Australia, people who were not just seeking, a fresh start, but often on the run
oh, yeah.
or explicitly deported from
Yes.
United from the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that even gets into a bunch of stuff today, like the start of NASCAR, even was from rum running.
Yes, I forgot about that, but yes.
Yep. So,
And the term bootlegging came from Cornish smugglers,
oh, yeah.
um,
Yep.
because they would wear these hip waders and they would go out to the dinghies ferrying goods from a ship to the shore, and they would wade out there and stuff their boots legs full of contraband
Yep.
to bring it to shore.
Whether it's coming from Canada, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, all over.
Yep.
You know, that's one reason I've always had a bit of an affection for Canadian Club whiskey, because that's how they got their start over here, was smuggling that in during Prohibition, and giving a big fat middle finger to the teetotalers and the intrusive religious temperance people
Right.
who passed the Volstead Act. But
And we
yeah,
have in my state here in Washington, we still have moonshiners up in the mountains who can trace their ancestry back to Appalachia.
oh wow, Yeah, bringing those skills across the country.
Yeah. And again, on the run from the feds.
Hmm.
In those days, up they would travel up the Skagit River by boat because there were no roads, and so that put them largely out of sight and out of mind of the feds.
Hmm.
And they're still going strong up there.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, people around here still do it, but it's a very contained thing. Like they might brew a batch for themselves and for their neighbors. Um, Now, when I went to school in Southern Illinois, I knew where to get some pretty good white lightning from Kentucky. Uh, so we would quite often do that. That's only about maybe 40 miles away from where we were, would be Paducah. So, yep.
Yeah, I used to have an uncle who lived, oddly enough, he was on the run from the local mob who
Oh, well.
who thought he had snitched on him.
Ooh.
And so he hid out in the mountains for like 30 years, literally 30 years under an assumed name. And he knew the moonshiners up there. He got to know them.
Oh, wow. Man. Yeah, Seattle, I think, is kind of an area that people forget about when you're thinking about organized crime, too. But it was, like you're saying, kind of a central way station, especially for Canadian hooch
Yep.
when it was coming in.
Yeah,
But
we have had our own branch of the Italian mob running strong here for 100 years.
hmm yep. Oh, definitely here in Illinois, too, in which I don't know how many people who are listening know that my family business is actually in alcohol distribution. We've been in it since the early 80s over here.
Ah,
Um, we were the first in this area to bring Coors over the Mississippi River. And that's kind of what got us our start. But we also have brands like Stag, Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think we have the franchise for Ballantine as
okay.
well. But yeah, I mean this state, there's so many laws that govern what we do that were
Oh yeah.
essentially written by the mob after Prohibition ended in 1933.
They wrote the
Uh,
regulations.
Basically, yeah, the remnants of them did. Like one of the laws that governs what we do is called the cash on delivery law. We cannot sell beer or alcohol on credit to a bar.
Really?
Um, yeah, I mean, that's, good business practice, I guess, but yeah, the state mandates it because that was how the mob wanted it ran, basically.
Ah,
But yeah, and being where I am in Quincy, Illinois, on the Mississippi River, there's quite a lot of lore about that too, especially with Capone, who had a house here, basically a vacation home, that was, I guess, owned by certain other mob figures after he died too. And my grandfather had told me a story about that place that back when he was a kid and 40 years before that, he would hear stories of the kids going to this house to trick or treat on Halloween, not because they'd get a lot of candy, but because they would get silver Liberty Head dollars from the owner. Um, which I'm sure that
oh
was,
yeah.
yeah, which I'm sure that was Capone and then others after him when he died who owned that place. But yeah, I mean, definitely this is Capone land here in Illinois.
Frank Colicurcio was the mob head here in Seattle.
Oh,
Um, they
um,
ran, yeah, they ran all the typical vices.
yeah, which many of them, they of course started with hooch and then like whorehouses and numbers running.
Right.
But then they got into drugs a lot of the time after that. Uh, with a lot of them, it was heroin, which the guy that you mentioned, is he connected then to the New York outfit?
They've never made that a direct connection.
Hmm.
He's the thinking is that he's largely independent.
Oh wow, interesting. So that's how a lot of it started, was with these little gangs, specifically in New York City, like the Five Points gang was one of them,
Hmm.
which Capone was actually a member there because he and his family are from Brooklyn
Okay.
before they went out to Chicago to make his name.
Well,
But
let's go back and start at the beginning and how the unintended consequences of a you know honestly as much as I hate prohibition, the people who were in favor of prohibition had noble intentions.
they did. I mean, a lot of it was they thought that it was directly tied to domestic violence, which in a lot of the cases it was. Let's
True.
just be honest there.
Very true.
But, in every other societal ill, which that's kind of bullshit to blame that all on booze. But yeah, there were some noble intent there. And that's when you get into like women. Man, what was her name? She was
Oh,
known as a fierce temperance advocate, especially out in Kansas.
right. Oh,
Um,
I forget what her name was.
she would a lot of the times walk into taverns before they passed the Volstead Act and just trash them with baseball bats and whatever else have you. Uh, and she was just notorious for that and giving speeches about it all over. And I mean, if you look at it, even in Kansas today, there's a lot of dry counties there. You know?
Still,
Yeah. Yep. And I'd say there, and probably Utah would be the second big one.
Carrie
But
Nation.
Carrie Nation, yeah, that was her name. And she was one of those first rabble rousers of the temperance movement. Um, which in a lot of the times too, it was also tied to women's suffrage before they got the right to vote. It was seen as sort of a pro feminist cause for the day, a feminist cause celeb for the day, to try to get temperance passed, because a lot of people foolishly thought that, hey, if you ban this, people are just going to stop.
Yeah, you know what? And there's still that thinking still exists today. Let's
Oh,
ban it and then
absolutely.
it'll stop existing. Well, guess what, people? Let's take one simple example. Murder's been against the law for a few years now,
Yeah.
and yet somehow it still happens.
Yep. And
Uh,
there's that and
yeah, certain
everything
drugs.
else.
Yeah, anytime prostitution is illegal largely, uh,
Yeah.
and that clearly that stopped.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at basically any sort of vice law, quote unquote vice law.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I don't know why there's some people who just have that mindset. They just think, oh, it's going to stop if we do it. Well, no, it's not.
Yeah, show me one example.
Yeah. You would think that we
Anyone,
would have learned.
any one example of where a prohibited behavior has stopped
Oh,
happening
yeah.
because of a law.
Yeah, I mean, it does not work. And you
No.
would think that people in this country would have known that after the lessons of Prohibition, which had started with the enactment of the 18th Amendment, the Volstead Act, which prohibited production and sale of intoxicating liquors, was the language of the law. That was in 1918. They drafted it. 1919. They passed it. Um,
It's pretty astonishing that that was able to get ratified that quickly.
yeah. Well, and I think that kind of gets back to this whole idea that was also coming to the fore of progressivism, that we can use the law, that we can use legislation to make a better society.
Yeah,
Which, it was
legislating
start.
morality
Yeah,
is something that has worked exactly 0 times in the history of ever.
exactly. I couldn't agree more. But yeah, I mean, it was gaining steam then. But also you had a lot of corruption that got it through, and that kept it going for 14 years until 1933 when it was repealed. And in the
Yeah.
middle of that, never mind our kids and so many young people getting gunned down in Tommy gun um, turf disputes, basically.
Well,
Because
there's a strong correlation between prohibition and the depression
oh, absolutely,
and the Dust Bowl.
yep,
Because guess who can't grow corn and barley? I mean, you can grow it, but you can't sell it if the liquor makers
yeah,
are not buying it.
yeah. If it's illegal to distill,
Right.
yeah,
So the farmers are out of business.
yeah, or they are seeing greatly reduced prices on it,
Right.
which
Which
it's
puts most
so
of them out of business. Yeah.
yeah, basically. Which so many of the brewers around this time, they first switched to brew what they called near beer, which is still around.
Right.
It's
It's awful
NA.
shit. Nobody
Yeah,
likes it.
the the very rare times that I've seen that drunk is my father, who was our manager. A lot of the times we'll go set up our draft truck at a event around here, which this is a very Catholic area, and
Yeah.
Catholics love to drink. Let me
Right.
tell you.
Right.
But when he's there and he's having to man it, he'll open up, a NA beer, non-alcoholic beer, just so he can drink with people
Ah,
and not, get buzz drunk at the time,
right.
because we have to keep some sobriety about us when we're doing that sort of thing. But yeah,
So,
they first
right.
switched to near beer, and then they switched a lot of them to doing things like medicines, um,
Oh, okay.
different types. Because technically, that was a workaround with the Volstead Act. You could get a doctor to prescribe you booze for whatever, and they would do that. Medically, you could still have it if they said that.
Wow.
So,
Well, another thing that people would do is they would try to make their own,
oh, yeah,
and it was a huge health problem. Um,
yes,
people got lead poisoning from their stills. People got sometimes they mixed in methanol
yep,
and were poisoned. The term bathtub gin has a very negative connotation because it fucking poisoned people a lot of times.
oh, yeah. If it wouldn't outright kill you, it would make you go blind a lot of the time
Yeah.
from what they put in it. I had a interesting page up on my laptop here while we were doing this. Another term for bathtub gin at the time, blue ruin, for a lot of the times what the color would be.
Wow.
But yeah, and then another one that's kind of close to it. This is more in the South, though. They called it the Jake Walk. Paralysis that fell on many Southerners as a result of drinking Jake, highly alcoholic Jamaican ginger extract,
Hmm.
as another way to skirt the Volstead Act. So, yeah,
Now I
uh,
understand a lot of breweries turned to making molasses. Is that right?
they did that as well.
Just to make
Yep.
some money.
Yeah, to get another use out of their equipment, because you have to remember that even though you're not allowed to do this stuff, you still have massive stilling equipment, at massive
Right?
bottle racking areas in different breweries, label making. and just everything that goes into, the production of domestic alcohol.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and employees.
oh yeah, yeah, and employees too.
Yeah.
And people weren't just going to let that stuff sit there and rot and then let even more people become unemployed if they could stop it. Which, by the way, our town of 40,000 here
Yeah.
had 6 different breweries in it.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, German Catholics, man.
Yeah. No, no. Yeah. There you go.
But yeah,
So they passed prohibition, and obviously demand for alcohol just disappeared overnight.
well, no, not exactly, but it did
What?
go way underground.
Yeah.
Um, this is when you saw the evolution of the speakeasy. And now people have, of course, heard that term all over.
Right?
But I wonder how many people know that in order to be a true speakeasy, it has to have a false front with it,
Oh, not
a
just an
business
alleyway
out
door
front.
with a sliding window.
Yeah, that is technically not a speakeasy.
Joe sent me.
Yep. They would have passwords a lot of the time too, but yeah, the false front was required to be a speakeasy. And
Uh,
basically without that it would be just like a roadhouse would be the term for it.
okay.
Um, or things like that, but there's also a bunch of other terms for speakeasies. My favorites are blind tiger and blind pig, which blind pig was a very popular term for it up in Chicago, and it still is. In fact, my cousin's cousin on the side not related to me had a bar here that they called the Blind Pig because of that.
So I learned something very interesting regarding the smuggling of whiskey and
Hmm.
how Scotch became popular in the United States, and it had to do with smuggling.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, so the bootleggers in America went to Ireland first and talked to the distillers there and said, look, we still have demand, and it's illegal, but we still have demand. All we want you to do is ship it to the Bahamas,
Hmm.
and we'll pick it up from there and go.
Hmm.
And you don't have to worry about it from that point on. And the
Wow.
Irish said no.
Dang.
So they went to the Scots. And the Scots said, sure.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me there. Man, they
And
kind of
so
have
that's
that.
how Scotch became so popular in the US instead of Irish whiskey, which I actually prefer.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Scotch either, but that's because I'm not a big fan of the malt in it.
I'm not a big fan of it tasting like mud.
Yeah, basically. But I mean, if my go-to drink, if we're going just straight up with that, is
Yeah.
bourbon.
Hmm.
And I'm a bourbon file. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all with the Scots.
It
They
it
kind of,
surprises me about the Irish though. The Irish
yeah,
were
that
didn't want
they.
to they didn't want to get anywhere near that business with the criminal element, I guess.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
Scotland kind of has that respect for the outlaw in their traditions, not
they
unlike
do.
us. Maybe
They do.
that's why.
We have the United States has some strong ties to the Scots, that's for sure.
Hmm. Absolutely. But yeah, very interesting there. But yeah, you had the Volstead Act passed, and it's important to remember um, the place that booze had in American life before that, too.
Yeah.
You're
What was
talking
that like?
about, even going back to the Puritans back in, the 1600s,
Hmm.
when so much of that they had to drink beer because the water was bad,
Right.
you know. And starting there, I mean, it had a huge place in American life where everybody from the laborer, the farmer, the preacher to the merchant would drink. Just everybody would. And then just all of a sudden one night, boom, it's gone. Or they would want it to be gone.
Right.
And it's not legal anymore. So you get the emergence slowly and then fast, it kind of got ramped up, of organized crime. And a lot of that started over, again, in the East, in New York City.
Yes.
And the first entry, actually, that I had with that, if I can find him, Arnold Rothstein, one of the more interesting
Oh,
types.
yeah.
Now, this guy, he was known as a Jewish gangster, but his big claim to fame around 1919, 1920 was the scheme to fix the 1919 World Series
Yes.
with Shoeless Joe Jackson being the big casualty out of that. But
Now
yeah, he was.
there were
Hmm.
three, wasn't there like three guys that kind of became buddies, right? And he was one of them.
Well, yeah. Um, it was him, and then we'll be getting into these too. You got Charlie Lucky Luciano,
Yes.
who is known as one, and Meyer Lansky was
Myra
another big
Lansky, yeah.
one.
Yeah.
He was a Jewish gangster, and his moniker was the mob's accountant. He was the uh, the smarts behind it, not unlike Rothstein, who one of his nicknames was the Brain. Um, but yeah, his big claim to fame was corrupting sports, and inversely, according to the Mob Museum, encouraging reforms. Um, he always denied it, but he was the man suspected of engineering the Chicago Black Sox baseball scandal when they threw the 1919 World Series. Um, he
Yeah.
loved gambling of all stripes too.
Still a black mark on professional baseball to this
Yep,
day.
yep. And you look at, I mean, so many cultural references to that, like Field of Dreams being one of the more prominent ones, I think.
Right.
Um, but he also loved casino games, cards, horse racing. He owned a very prominent wire service with all this stuff too, that would, wire that information about all those things across the country.
Okay.
Uh, he was also accused of engineering the outcomes of quite a few horse races and operating an illegal casino in Manhattan. Um, Now, getting back to the 1919 World Series, he was indicted but never convicted. Um, and he always insisted that although he made some money gambling on that, others, perhaps using his name, had actually compromised the players.
Oh.
So, I mean,
That's not
that.
entirely unfeasible, though, is it?
No, I mean, it probably isn't because he was a big name. Um, but testimony from a number of the White Sox players delivered to a grand jury mysteriously disappeared. And none of the players, 8 of whom, including the famous Shoeless Joe Jackson, were
Yeah.
banned from baseball for life, but none of the players would testify during the actual trial, pleading the fifth. So, self incrimination.
Right.
But, um, yeah, during Prohibition, he reached new heights of power and income. He was quicker than some of his crime lord colleagues to see the huge profits that could come from illegal sale of booze. Um, Notably, although Rothstein was often considered a professional, even corporate member of the mob, he was also unafraid to use his connections with violent New York City street gangs to further his business interests. Um, and he actually died not that old. See, that would have been, I'm doing the math in my head right now. He would have been about 48. Died in 1928
Hmm.
in New York City.
Was it a hit?
That Man, I'm looking at that. I don't think it was. I thought it was something else like he got sick.
Okay.
I might check that while we're talking here because that's weird that the Mob Museum doesn't have that. But um,
By the way, where was it? Is it HBO's or Amazon or Netflix has that Making of the Mob series that's really good.
yeah, that was Amazon, I believe.
Amazon.
Scorsese, I thought, was one of the creatives behind that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
So,
you got Arnold Rothstein and quite a few others from out there too. Just flipping through my notes again.
so one of the other cultural elements that we should talk about, because it was a huge factor in all of this, was the Thompson submachine gun.
Oh, absolutely.
The
Um,
Thompson, and I actually got to hold one in the FBI's armory in Denver when I
oh
was
wow.
18. It was fabulous. It's a beautiful piece of machinery. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it shoots a 45 caliber ACP round, which is the same as the Colt 911 uh,
Mm-hmm.
semi-automatic pistol that is still in use today. Um,
Yeah,
the
that's a
the Thompson,
excellent pistol.
excellent,
Yeah.
yeah. The Thompson could be configured in a couple of different ways. You could have a pistol grip, front grip,
Mm-hmm.
or just a regular stock on the front. Uh, you could have a 20 round clip or a 200 round drum, something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
That's
Uh,
probably the more famous look, I
right,
think. Yeah.
right. Um, and you could buy them at the hardware store.
Yep. You could also order them directly out of the Sears Roebuck catalog.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. And
But
this was an actual submachine gun, which means when it was on full auto mode, I believe it was selectable, maybe not. Um,
mhm.
that as long as you held the trigger down, it would keep firing until
Yep.
you ran out of ammunition.
And to a lot of people, the Tommy gun might seem like a cliche right now, but there's a reason for that. I mean, they
Yeah.
really were used that much by Prohibition era gangsters. Um, One reason for that too is that they were very popular in World War One. There was essentially a overabundance of them because of that.
And they were still popular when World War II came around.
Yep.
They were actually more known in World War II than World War One.
Wow.
I think so, anyway. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, anybody could get one. Anybody,
Yep.
except if you were a policeman.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Uh,
No, seriously, the feds and the police, the FBI, the Treasury, local cops couldn't afford them.
no. No, I mean, people have to remember as well with all of this that this is just when the FBI was being founded
Right.
around that time with
And
J. Edgar Hoover and what have you.
and they were typically armed with a Smith and Wesson 38
Yep. Yep.
and
There.
going up so 6 rounds against
Hmm.
200.
Yep. They were totally outgunned and outmatched with those service revolvers. Man. But yeah, the Tommy gun, it earned that reputation. So there's a reason that
Yeah.
it is, used so much.
I
But
mean, yeah, you can still buy semi-automatic replicas of those. They're um, they're not a modern gun by any means. I mean, the AR-15 is far superior in every way. The 45 ACP round is kind of like lobbing a softball in comparison.
yeah, yeah. Basically, it's just barely a step above bringing a knife to a gunfight when you're talking about
Right.
that. But yeah,
But it's a lot of lead in a hurry, especially when you're up against a revolver.
yep, it really is. Hey, there's a figure that I think a lot of people overlook when they're looking at this time as well.
Yeah.
And he was one of the earlier ones, like Rothstein. And that was Charles Ponzi, the uh,
Ponzi.
the
Now,
namesake.
how does he factor into this?
Charles Ponzi, the namesake of the Ponzi scheme. He was born in 1882 in Parma, Italy. And I found this just way too interesting. He really was a prolific thief back then in Italy, and he got into so much trouble there that his family just one day said, "Fuck it, we're not bailing you out anymore." And the government said, "You're such a nuisance, we're going to deport you to the United States." So that is literally how he got here.
Wow. He was
Um,
kicked out of every good country.
yeah, yeah. Um, But another interesting story there, he had something like $200 with him on the boat at the time,
Yeah.
um,
Which is
just
a lot of
before.
money. It's a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Oh, yeah. When you're talking about this being 1919,
Yeah.
that's a lot of money. He was running a few different card games on the ships on his way over. He lost all of it but $2.50.
Whoa. Not a good gambler.
Yeah, literally. But it was it was 1920 when he got here and he landed in Boston, moved there, and he started thinking about various different schemes. He got a job as a waiter at a big restaurant, but he was fired for shortchanging customers and all this
Wow.
other stuff.
So
Basically
so
fired for
he
graft.
just could not do anything straight.
No, no, I mean he couldn't. This guy was almost compulsive in how much of a thief he was. But soon after, he moves to Montreal and gets a job in a bank where he is fired for bilking the elderly customers,
Jesus.
and he gets 3 years in jail in Canada for that. Um, so yeah, and he's all the time he's a guy who always is thinking about quick ways to make a buck, basically. And during this time, when he was 3 years behind bars, his family back in Italy, I guess, was wondering about him.
Yeah.
And he ended up writing to his family, telling them that he had a job with the warden.
Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of "I'm in jail," the reason I'm here is I got a job with the warden. But now this is when you he also got hooked into a scheme when he was in Canada that was all about it was basically human trafficking in Italian immigrants that he would bring in through Canada and then illegally smuggle into the United States. So
Wow.
he got another 3 years for that after serving 3 years for graft at the bank. But
So was that while he was still in prison he got charged with that, or after he got out and then he went right back in? He,
it was after he got out
okay.
and he went right back in for it.
He's
But
not a real good thief.
no, no, he's
I mean,
refining it though.
he keeps trying, but he keeps getting caught.
Yeah. Um. Now this is when he gets closer to the scheme that will become his namesake, the Ponzi scheme,
Mm,
and this revolved around what they called the postal reply coupon. And essentially, what it was some years before this, because of all the immigrants moving to the United States from Europe and around the world, the International Conference of Postal Masters came together and they issued these coupons that you could essentially buy them very cheaply in certain areas and get them to your relatives to send. So it's cheaper for you to get them being an American
Yeah,
and to get them to your relatives who don't have as much money as you do. Even
back in the old
amongst
country.
the
So this is like a early version of what, like a money order kind of thing?
essentially is kind of like that, but the value of it was in postage, basically. But the scheme, and I was just bringing up the technical definition for this. The scheme revolved around a legitimate opportunity that basically could be classified as what's called arbitrage in accounting circles.
Where you take advantage of the difference between the price of buying and selling.
Yes, the technical definition, the simultaneous buying and selling of securities, currency, or commodities in different markets or in derivative forms in order to take advantage of differing prices, like you
Right.
said, for the same asset. So, Ponzi saw that you could do this with these postal coupons, and he began selling securities to people based upon this idea that I can get you a 50% return on your investment in 45 days or a double the return in 3 months.
Hmm.
And his real brilliance with this wasn't in the mathematics, which are way convoluted when
Right.
you're looking at it. His brilliance was in understanding people's psychology with all of this. He knew, even though that it was later found out that he didn't buy one single reply coupon with the money that he got, but
Yeah, that's
he
where he got in trouble.
well, yeah. I mean, once you get down to it, with the numbers with this, it's impossible to sustain. There's no way that he could have sustained it because literally every dollar with that scheme, every dollar that he brought in was making him richer just with the outcome, but it was also putting him into gross amounts of debt. Because think about it, you're
Yeah.
guaranteeing 50% return 45 days or double your money in 3 months. But now his brilliance though, like I said, was the psychology of it. Because early on when people would come back and want their money out quick, he
Yeah.
would pay them
Right.
out quick.
That's how he was able to. That's the whole. That's the PR, the word of mouth, is to make sure the early investors are paid
Yes.
so that they talk it up and bring in more.
Yes. Absolutely. That holds true even for Ponzi schemes today, which these also have the shape of a pyramid when you lay them out, and that's where you get the idea of pyramid scheme,
Right.
basically meaning the same thing as a Ponzi scheme. But just to show you this guy's character too, he even cheated his wife and his uncle. Yeah, he took
Oh,
their
what a
money.
scumbag.
No shit. It's horrible. But I mean, he was the ineffably smooth con man, the confidence man who
Right.
could talk anything up, and he could make you comfortable with all of this stuff. But he brought in so much cash from this that no kidding, he hired cops, Boston police, to stand in the lower part of his office and make bank runs every hour.
Jesus.
Yeah, he
Every
netted
hour.
every hour. Yeah, he netted a total of 422,000 in only a couple of months with it.
Now
Yeah, and
remember,
remember,
remember, people, this is a time when a loaf of bread cost a nickel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He netted that much that fast. And remember as well, this is a guy who only had 250 to his name not long before this.
Wow. And he just served 6 years in jail.
Yeah, before it. But
Yeah.
after netting the 422K, his next scheme was an interesting one. Again, he his plan was to keep making deposits in one bank, and his idea was when he gets enough deposits made there
Hmm.
that he was going to go in and basically say, if you don't give me a controlling interest, I'm taking my money out
Huh.
and your bank will fold. So that was the next thing that he did.
I'm surprised he didn't just take out a loan and then do it.
Yeah,
'Cause
that's true.
as somebody once said, when you owe $1,000, the bank owns you. When you owe $1 million, you own the bank.
Basically. And it,
So- yeah, so he could have done the same thing, had possibly even more leverage if he had borrowed against that cash and then said, if you don't give me a controlling interest, not only will I withdraw my cash, but I'll default on the loan.
this is true. That's interesting. He could have done that.
Yeah.
But he ended up buying this bank for about 220,000. So,
So now
but
he's a banker.
basically, Charles Ponzi is your banker. But it was around July 3rd of that same year that his company was worth about 3 million is what he had with cash on hand. But at the same time, his position was 4.5 million in the hole to show you to get an idea of the mathematical mechanics there. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
but now
it's
what?
the entire yeah, I mean, one of the defining qualities of a Ponzi scheme is it's unsustainable.
Right, right. And I just want to drive that point home for people who are listening, just how unsustainable this is. But now Ponzi, I think he knew that at the time because what he thought he would do by the time that this house of cards falls apart
Yeah.
was just buy lawyers and judges to get off.
It's not, he wouldn't have been the first or the last.
Yeah, no, I mean he wouldn't have. But in 1921, just to show you how much cash that he had to throw around, he dropped $500,000 on furnishings for his house.
Jesus.
Yeah, $500,000 on that. And on top of it, he bought the old shipping firm where he worked earlier on when he got to the United States, just so he could fire his old boss.
Who hasn't ever dreamed of that?
Yeah, yeah, damn. Hey, this guy, he was incredibly bold too. Um, but now let's see. About this time, he had about a quarter of the Boston police investing in the Ponzi
Oh,
scheme.
oops.
Yeah,
Oops.
yeah.
That's
And
a
they
that's
were
a that's a miscalculation, I can tell right now.
um they were he had a quarter of them in his books, man.
That
And there
see
was
see it's one thing to pay them to make bank runs for you. It's another thing to cheat them, cause
yeah.
yeah, that's no, that's a bad move. Bad move, Charles. Bad move.
uh, hey, there was a lot of this is around the time that he got a lot of publicity that started ginning itself up too. I mean, Ponzi was a celebrity before people knew he was a crook.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, and his wealth kept accumulating with that because he would bringing in a lot of cash.
sure.
But it was around this time as well that the guy, you see, when Ponzi set his office up in Boston, he got a guy to loan him furnishings for it. a store owner to loan him his furnishings.
Okay.
And it was around this time that the guy who did that turned around and sued Ponzi, saying that he was a partner because he did that. Um,
Mm,
I mean, that was pretty much bullshit, that
right.
lawsuit.
Yeah.
But that caused a run on his securities. You have
Oh,
people running in there and saying, hey, if you're going to go under, I want my money out.
right.
So the press and the state regulators started knocking. And it was around this time that he was making about 250,000 a day coming in.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
but the
What would that be today? 25 million? Some
oh
crazy
man,
shit like that?
I am going to have to bring up an inflation calculator while we are talking.
Because I mean, it's some enormous amount.
At
But
250K a day is huge today.
well,
But
yeah, I wouldn't turn that down.
but yeah, he was bringing in that much, and like I said, this was when the government was starting to knock the regulators.
Yeah.
And basically, what happened was when the Attorney General of Massachusetts said, "I want to look at your books." Ponzi said, "Okay, I will allow you to do that." And
Jesus.
yeah,
That's
well,
I'll
and
let you.
yeah, yeah, he let them do that. I mean, he stepped back and he said, "Okay, I'll do that." And just to keep you cool with it all, I won't take in any more money just while you're doing that. And finally, the government came to the conclusion, no kidding, that his books were too convoluted to understand. So,
Oh, Jesus.
yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, this goes
Mhm.
beyond voodoo economics. Um,
It's Italian bookkeeping, man.
oh, the $250,000 in 1921 would equal $3,403,657 and change today.
Every day.
Every day. That's what he was bringing in.
Wow.
Um, but Ponzi, around that time, he knew that the house of cards was starting to fall faster.
Yeah.
And what he proposed that he was going to do, he proposed this to the bank. I am going to roll over all these people's money into buying a fleet of merchant ships that the US government was selling on the cheap. And I don't know what he was going to do with that, like start a shipping company of his own, but he
Yeah.
thought that that is what would get him out of it, that he would roll all their securities into it.
Why didn't he? Yeah, as Patty says in the comments, why didn't he just cut and run?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe it was just the sheer amount of cash that was being um,
Switzerland
kicked
loves
around.
cash.
This is true. He would have had to have physically smuggled it out, I would guess, though.
Buy one of them fucking merchant ships and load it up and go sail to Switzerland. Well, I mean, not
uh,
all the way, but you know what I mean.
yep. Um, but yeah, the bankers, when they heard that scheme that he wanted to do, said emphatically, hell no, we're not doing that. So they started getting a little bit of sense back. But they started digging deeper. And around this time, there was another run on Ponzi securities. And he lost about $2 million in a day from that. So 2 million in that time.
Wow.
That would equal something like
Wow.
15 million today, going by that figure I just quoted from
Right?
the yeah. Um, so there was a riot too when that run happened. There was a riot in Boston. Um, and
How
you
did they
know,
know?
not sure with that,
How could
but
they tell the difference?
actually with that, Interestingly, the people who turned him in and said that this was a scam
Yeah.
was his PR guy. He hired a fellow by the name of William McMasters to handle all his press inquiries. And like I said, they were kind of massive coming in because he was basically a rock star of that time before they knew he was a crook. So he hired this guy McMasters, and McMasters was the one who ended up turning him in with everything.
Wow.
Um, and he was indicted on 86 counts of fraud. Um, and interestingly, with the psychology of all this, when they had Ponzi doing the perp walk, the officers who arrested him were mobbed when they were taking him into jail.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, all the people said, no, he wouldn't screw us like that.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, sure, because again, he was smart enough to keep paying out at least some money to people, so it seemed like a legit thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And he knew to keep it that way.
Yeah.
But during that time, it came out that he never bought a single coupon with it. And the totals with the scam, 17,000 people dropped about $10 million on it.
Jeez.
So, and it was just huge. But yeah, he got 5 years on a postal fraud charge, served 3.5, and then he got 7 to 9 years ran consecutively after that from a state fraud charge. But this doesn't end quite yet. He
No?
skipped he skipped town to Florida where he started another bullshit business, and this one was in like property, and he was convicted of fraud there. But he skipped again to Texas where he started another bogus business.
Wow.
And he was ultimately caught and returned.
Did
They
they did they confiscate all his money?
that I don't think they did. I don't think they ever got much of any of it back.
Wow.
Pennies on the dollar. But they deported him to Italy in 1934.
Italy's going, this guy again?
Basically, like you're sending this asshole back. We gave him to you for a reason. But he ultimately got a position in Mussolini's government.
Well, that makes sense.
Basically, he was like a ambassador to Brazil or something like that. But that, I mean, at any rate, that position got him doing things for Mussolini in Brazil. And it was during that time that he was charged with smuggling diamonds out of that country.
Out
So
of,
even
out of
then,
Brazil?
out of Brazil,
I didn't know Brazil was known for diamonds.
I
Hmm.
didn't either until then.
Although technically, having been a I spent a little time as a diamond cutter and as a young man, diamonds can be found almost everywhere, continent-wise. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, there are a few places where they're, you know, higher concentrations than others, like in Africa. But I
Hmm.
mean, there's a state park in Arkansas where you can go and dig up your own fucking diamonds,
Wow. Dang.
and they've actually had a few pretty good sized ones come out of there.
Wow. Yeah, I think the goal with this one, oddly, this scheme that he cooked up was mostly to benefit Mussolini's government, the way that I understood it.
Sure.
Almost like they were hoarding gold in case the government collapsed and they needed to, pay off all these uh, wartime debts that were soon to be accrued. And I'm sure they would have accrued a lot of other debts with Italy's invasion of Libya, as an example.
Sure.
around that time. But yeah, no doubt he was um, definitely keeping some for himself somewhere along the line too, being Charles Ponzi.
Right.
But um, yeah, he before that, one of his last schemes that he was trying to attempt was writing his autobiography and cashing in on it. But that never materialized. And he ended up dying in 1949, basically penniless when he died.
Well, that's what happens. It,
Yeah, he deserved it.
so just to bring this up to modern times, Ponzi schemes still exist, although legally.
Oh yeah.
They're known as multi-level marketing.
Yep.
And the distinction is the legal distinction is that they purport to sell a product.
Yes.
And that's the
Yeah.
difference. But you can tell it's a Ponzi scheme because they encourage you to bring more people into the system.
Yes. The rule of thumb with that is if the promised cash it comes more from the people you recruit, then it's likely a Ponzi scheme.
Hmm.
The people you recruit versus the cash
Right.
or the goods themselves.
Having sat in many presentations, I can tell you that they will talk for quite a while about the glories of the product and then go, now, if you really want to make money,
Hmm.
you got to recruit people.
Yep.
And and what happens is um, nobody makes any money unless you're one of the founders.
Essentially,
If you're
the
in, you got to be in on the ground floor, literally the ground floor. Some of the first people in. Those are the ones who always make the money, and then they get out.
well, and what's interesting as well with the MLM schemes is that with most of them, you could get every single person on planet Earth
Hmm.
plus about 3 billion, and you still wouldn't make money, essentially. That just goes to show you the mathematics of that.
Right.
The only way to get ahead is if you are on, like you said, the ground level of it. So, but yeah, I think a lot of people tend to forget about Charles Ponzi when you're looking at these mobsters, swindlers, and the like. Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't have lumped him in with in the same kind of category, but he was every bit as a criminal.
oh yeah, I think
He
there's
just
no doubt
didn't
he was a
shoot anybody.
psychopath. Yeah, he didn't kill anybody, but man,
He ruined a lot
man,
of
he
people.
screwed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. But yeah, and he was around when you had this start with a lot of these other mobsters, like we were saying with Arnold Rothstein being one of the first.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how many others we want to get into right now as far as time. I didn't think it would
I
take
think
up as much time.
there's just so much cool information about these guys.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I think we need to continue this next week.
Oh, we certainly could. And get
Yeah,
into the some of the coronavirus scams that people are seeing too with all that.
yeah. I mean, we haven't even touched on Lucky Luciano, Cap-
Bugsy Siegel, Al Capone.
Dillinger,
Yep.
yeah,
And we have a crap load we could say for that show.
Pretty Boy Floyd, you know,
Yep.
Babyface Nelson.
Dutch Schultz. So many of them.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, absolutely. I'd look forward to doing that next week.
I could see
Uh,
this taking 3 weeks. It's just so much, and
it,
that's
it
okay.
could. Yeah. Yeah, because we aren't even, we're barely scratching the surface with it. But man. Yeah, Charles Ponzi, man. He was an underrated psychopath with that because, man, that's just prolific what he did.
Well, and it's a good opportunity to reinforce the concept that Not all psychopaths are, most psychopaths aren't even criminals, by the way. And the
Oh
ones
yeah.
who are criminals, very few of them are violent.
Yep. So true. And there's so many of them that are in business is a big thing.
Business, military, politics, um,
Law
police.
enforcement.
Yeah,
Yep. Clergy.
yeah,
And he was undoubtedly one of them, man. Is all like I said, is almost impulsive the way that he would scam people.
right.
So, but yeah, I mean, there were so many ways that people were trying to make money back then. Not just with bootlegging alcohol, gambling, or whorehouses. You had so many scams.
Yeah, well, securities regulation was, even calling it regulation was kind of a generous term.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was. Yep. So that was really getting into Teddy Roosevelt, who helped with a lot of that. Like the Sherman Antitrust Act
Right.
in one of the starts of it. But yeah, I guess come back next week for more, and we will definitely touch on this list that I have of coronavirus stuff. That's all scam related. Go to our Facebook page too, facebook.com/Real Monsters Podcast. Give that a like if you haven't, and we're posting a lot of that stuff up there um, for people to use and to share about like these scams, especially, and just things to watch out for. In
Absolutely.
addition to the usual news. Um,
All right. Well,
so yeah,
stay healthy, everybody. Stay inside unless you got to be out, like me.
please do. Stay healthy, one and all, and if you are sick, get well, rest up.
Absolutely. Good night, everybody.
Good night.